Solitary rancher found a Cherokee girl tied to a tree until her peaceful warrior kin arrived. The wind moved like memory through the high valley, brushing the long grasses and whispering down the narrow gulch where the pine trees stood sentinel. One of them had grown twisted, its trunk bent by decades of storms, its limbs scarred with age. A hawk circled above, cutting arcs through a pale sky bruised with early dusk. The land was quiet, save for the creak of saddle leather and the muffled thud of hooves on frost-hardened ground. Elias Cordell rode alone. His coat was worn at the shoulders, stitched and restitched by a hand long gone. His hat brim sagged a little on one side, and his boots carried the red dust a distance. He did not travel often, nor did he welcome company. Folks in town said he was kind enough, just too quiet for conversation. He kept himself up at his ranch on the ridge where no one had cause to visit unless something needed burying. He hadn't intended to pass this way. The north fence had come down in the last windstorm, and he was tracking where a few of his maras had wandered. A trail of prints in the dirt led him farther into the valley, into the stand of trees where shadows moved differently. That was where he saw her. At first, she looked like part of the land, her dark dress torn and dust-streaked, her bare feet stained red from clay and dry blood. She was tied to a tree, hands bound behind her, rope tight across her middle. A scrap of cloth hung around her throat. Her hair was long and tangled with wind, and her face, half in shadow, half in the dying light, was stone still. Elias reined in his horse. The woman didn't flinch, didn't cry out, just stared, calm and silent, like she'd already made peace with whatever ending the day had in store. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching soft through fallen needles. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions. He looked at the rope, saw how it had cut into the bark, saw the dry blood at her wrist. Whoever left her here hadn't meant for her to be found. Still, she was alive. He took out his knife and worked at the knots. The rope had been pulled tight with intent. Expert hands, probably more than one. When the last strand gave, she stumbled forward, catching herself on the tree. Elias reached for her arm, then thought better of it. He let his hands fall to his sides. Her voice came quiet. "You got no reason to help me." "I reckon no one needs a reason." Her eyes, dark as wet earth, narrowed slightly. Not suspicion, not fear, just study. She wasn't used to being helped. That much was plain. He stepped back, giving her room. "You got a name?" A beat passed. "Why, she said, the words soft on wind. "Elias." She nodded once. The rope still hung loose from her waist. She made no move to brush it off. "You can ride if you want. My place is just up the ridge. Got a warm stove. Quiet." Her legs trembled as she walked toward the horse. He didn't offer to lift her. She didn't ask. She climbed into the saddle with effort, but no complaint. The ride back was near silent, save for the creak of the saddle and the hush of branches swaying. Elias led the horse at a steady pace. Waya held herself like a soldier who'd survived a battle no one saw. At the ranch, dusk had settled full. The sky had turned a deep kind of blue that only came in winter. Smoke curled from the chimney. Elias helped her down, this time because she swayed slightly. Her feet hit the earth with a softness that belied her condition. He gestured to the porch. "There's a chair near the stove. Take it if you want." She didn't hesitate, stepped up, crossed the threshold, and stood by the fire like she belonged there. Elias followed, hung his coat, and moved to the stove. He ladled stew into a chip bowl, set it in front of her on the small table. She sat, ate slow, deliberate. Each bite was careful, like the act of eating was still being relearned. He didn't watch her directly, just caught a reflection in the stove's iron door. Her face had the kind of stillness that came from long grief, settled, not weeping, the kind that ran deep and quiet like groundwater. After some time, she looked up. "You ain't afraid of what follows me?" "No." "You don't ask what happened?" "I figure if you wanted to say it, you would." A long silence passed. "My kin will come," she said at last. He nodded once. "They know where you are?" "They'll know." "You got trouble coming with them?" "No trouble. Only truth." That night, she refused the bedroom, chose the porch instead, curled up near the bench with the coat he'd offered earlier draped over her knees. He watched her from the window a while. She sat straight, alert, a woman who didn't trust walls or locks. He didn't blame her. The next morning, Elias found her already awake, sitting by the corral fence, watching the horses drift in mist. She looked like she belonged there, not like a guest, like part of the land. Days passed like that. Quiet, simple. She stayed out of the house mostly, helped stack firewood, cleaned tools without being asked. She never took, only gave, spoke little but listened close. When she walked, her feet made no sound. He noticed things about her, how she knelt when she worked, how she closed her eyes when the wind shifted, like it told her something. Once, he found her laying dried sage on the windowsill, her touch light as breath. She caught him watching and didn't look away. "You don't need to believe," she said. "I don't reckon belief is needed for something to be true." One evening, he sat on the porch steps, whittling a piece of driftwood. She approached and sat beside him, hands tucked in her lap. They didn't speak. The quiet stretched long and easy between them. He carved a feather from the wood, long and curved, with fine notches along the shaft. When he finished, he set it beside her. She picked it up, held it with both hands like something sacred, then stood and walked away, taking the feather with her. That night, before sleep took him, Elias stared at the ceiling and wondered how long it had been since the house had felt like something more than shelter. Outside, the wind moved again to the pines, whispering secrets in a tongue older than words. Somewhere deep in the land, things had begun to shift, not loud, not fast, but in the way roots reach for water after long drought. And though he wouldn't name it yet, Elias knew something had started the moment he'd found her. Not a rescue, not a debt, just two kinds of quiet learning to live beside one another. And far off in the dark, something else was moving, something coming. Not a threat, not a reckoning, but a return. The days moved like smoke through a chimney, slow, curling upward, disappearing into blue. Winter light spilled pale across the ridge, and in its hush, the land breathed again. Snow lingered in shadows, but where sun touched the earth, small things began to stir, blades of grass, the wings of moths, the scent of thaw. Wyatt did not ask to stay, and Elias never offered. Still she remained. She rose before dawn, bare feet padding across the wooden porch. Her breath whitened the cold. She moved without noise like a deer or a shadow. Some mornings she stood still for long moments near the tree lean, as if listening for a sound only she could hear. Elias watched her sometimes from behind the curtain, coffee warming his hands, uncertain if he was intruding just by seeing. He began to notice her hands, how they touched the world with reverence. She fed the horses gently, as if they were old friends. She washed tools and lined them by size, their metal catching light. She planted something near the side of the barn, sage or maybe sweetgrass. He didn't ask. She never explained her reasons, and he never pressed. Between them stretched a quiet more honest than most conversations. He worked the land like always, mending fences, checking traps, riding out to the east pasture. She never followed, but her presence lingered, as though she had carved herself into the ranch with invisible hands. Her silence was not absence, it was observation. Elias began to understand the difference. One morning, he found a pile of firewood neatly stacked by the shed. The axe sat beside it, wiped clean. She stood nearby, sleeves rolled, breath steady. "You didn't have to," he said. "I know." It was the longest sentence she'd spoken in 2 days. She returned to splitting logs without waiting for thanks. He watched her for a moment, how she gritted her teeth before each swing, how her shoulders trembled from the strain. Her strength wasn't loud. It was stubborn. That evening, he set a small tin of salve on the porch beside her, said nothing, just placed it there and went inside. The next morning it was gone. She began humming sometimes, soft, rhythmic melodies without words. When the wind passed through the trees, she'd tilt her head slightly, as though answering something ancient. Elias never asked what the songs meant, but they stayed with him long after her voice faded. He carved more now, not just feathers, but small creatures, a rabbit, a curl fox, the profile of a hawk mid-dive. He left them where she might find them, the fence post, her folded blanket, the window sill. She never acknowledged them, but he noticed she tucked the rabbit into her pouch, left the fox near her herbs, placed the hawk on a beam over her bedroll. When spring began to break through the frost, a man from town rode up, Dawson, a rancher with slick boots and a mouth that chewed too many words. He rode up with dust on his shoulders and eyes full of questions. Elias stepped outside to meet him, arms folded. "Heard you're keeping a squaw out here," Dawson said, grinning like a snake in the sun. Elias didn't answer. Dawson leaned from his saddle, spitting near the porch. "Don't want your name mixed with theirs. Folks talk. You can leave," Elias said, voice low and still. "She yours?" "No one's mine." Dawson snorted. "You better watch what follows her. Those folks, they don't forget." Elias stepped forward, slow, not threatening, just solid. "I said you can leave." Dawson studied him a moment longer, then clicked his tongue and turned his horse. Dust rose behind him like smoke. Waya had watched from behind the door. When Elias stepped back inside, she said nothing. But that night, she left a carved feather on his dinner plate. He picked it up without a word and slipped into the pocket over his heart. She shared more after that, though not in long tales. Just pieces, like stones in a riverbed. Her people had been pushed from land to land, each time told it was better this way. Her father was once a speaker, a man who carried stories, not weapons. He died speaking peace to men who carried guns. Waya had been traded in a silence so cold it never thawed. "Some say I'm cursed," she said one evening, her eyes reflecting firelight. "Others just say I'm unlucky." "You're still here," Elias said. "That count for something." She looked at him then, really looked. "You don't see me as broken?" "I see you." That was all he said. It was all he needed to. He came to understand that she did not need saving. She needed soil, a place to root, to rest. Not because she was weak, but because even the strongest trees grow tired of wind. As the days lengthened and the river broke its ice, she began sleeping inside the house. At first just near the hearth, then on the woven cot by the window. She still rose early, still kept her silence, but sometimes her silence felt like an invitation. One night, the fire crackled low, and she stood by the table where he carved. "You listen more than most," she said. "I was raised by someone who spoke too much," he replied. "Taught me the value of quiet." She nodded, her gaze drifting to the feather he always kept nearby. "My father said feathers remind us to lift what's heavy lightly." They shared the room a while longer without speaking. Outside, wind moved the pines in long, sweeping sighs. Elias knew something had shifted, not just in her, but in him. He had grown used to solitude, but now, the silence he'd once worn like armor was turning into something gentler. A space to hold someone else's breath, someone else's sorrow. The stillness between them wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace. Late that week, he found a carved pendant hanging from the post near the barn. A bear etched with care, painted with ash and earth. Her gift, her way of saying what she didn't put into words. He held it in his hand a long time. Far off, in the distance beyond the valley, he thought he saw smoke rising. A thin, almost invisible thread against the sky. A signal, perhaps, or maybe just a reminder. She had said her kin would come. But for now, she stayed. And he no longer wondered why. Spring came slowly, but it came. Snowmelt whispered through dry creeks, coaxing wildflowers from their winter sleep. The ridge softened, turned green at the edges, and the scent of wet earth hung thick in the morning air. Birds returned in quiet flocks. Elias watched them build nests beneath the eaves, their fluttering wings like breathing stitched into wood. Waya moved differently now, less like someone on borrowed ground. She walked with steady steps, her shoulders no longer braced for flight. Her hair, once wild and tangled, hung in a single braid down her back, dark as a raven's wing. She still woke early, still listened to the wind, but now she sang while working, low, rhythmic sounds that seemed older than the hills. Elias didn't speak much more than before, but his silences had changed. Once they guarded him. Now they made room. He'd begun leaving the door open in the evenings, letting the scent of her cooking drift inside. She favored roots, herbs, wild greens. Nothing wasted, nothing done in haste. One morning she came in with her hands cupped, holding a nest fallen from a tree. Inside, 2 pale blue eggs, uncracked. She placed the nest near the hearth, between 2 pieces of driftwood, and said, "Fire is more than warmth. It's where life waits." He didn't answer then. He only watched her fingers trace the edge of the woven twigs, like she was asking him a question. That night, he carved a small phoenix from ashwood and set it beside the nest before dawn. They didn't speak of it. They didn't need to. The rhythm between them grew stronger, unspoken, precise. She swept the barn before he asked. He brought water to the garden when the sun grew sharp. Once, when his horse bucked and he fell hard on his side, she came running from the orchard, panic rising like dust in her wake. She said nothing, but her hands trembled when she touched his ribs. He watched her face as she checked for bruising, and something in him softened in a way that hurt a little. That night, she left a strip of leather on his nightstand, braided with thread, and 3 beads the color of fire. He held it long after the lamp went out. Elias had never thought himself as a man worthy of tending. He was good at fences, quiet with horses, decent at mending his own wounds. But the way Waya watched him when he was tired, the way she left Honeyroot by his bed without explanation, made him wonder if he'd spent too long mistaking loneliness for peace. Still, nothing between them was rushed. No declarations. No claims. Just gestures, subtle, deliberate. A plate turned toward the other. A shawl draped over a chair. A glance that held a little longer than it should. One evening, thunder cracked across the western sky. The wind turned sharp. Elias stood by the barn, watching the clouds boil dark. Waya stepped out from the garden, dirt still on her hands. "Storm's coming," she said. "I know. You always stand still when they do. I like to watch them arrive." The first drops fell fat and fast. Then the sky broke open. The horses panicked. One reared. Another bolted toward the fence. Elias cursed under his breath and ran. Rain turning the dust beneath his boots into mud. The wind howled. He reached the gate, struggling with the latch. Lightning split the sky, throwing blue light across the fields. And then she was beside him. She moved without hesitation, hair plastered to her skin, eyes locked on the colt trying to buck free. They moved together, her voice low and steady, his hands firm but gentle. Between the 2 of them, they calmed the herd. Breath and sweat and thunder mingled in the dark. At one point, her shoulder brushes, and he felt it like a brand. When it was done, they stood side by side beneath the overhang of the barn, soaked through and shivering. He looked at her, rain running down her cheek like a second skin. "You shouldn't have come out," he said. "You think I'd let you face a storm alone?" He stared at her a long moment. The rain softened. The lightning moved east. She stood with her arms crossed, jaw set, not stubborn, just sure. Something broke open in him then. Not loudly, not all at once. Just a quiet knowing that grew too large to ignore. Back inside, she peeled off her wet shawl and laid it by the fire. He handed her a towel. Their fingers touched. Brief, warm, unspoken. Later, when the wind died and only the fire remained, she sat across from him in the glow. Her eyes caught the light like amber. She didn't speak. He didn't either. But the stillness between them crackled, alive, near unbearable in its weight. He reached into his pocket and placed a leather braid she'd made him on the table. "I keep it close," he said. She studied it, then him. "You see what others miss." "I see you." Her lips parted, not quite a smile. "I've never belonged anywhere. Not fully. You belong here." The words came from somewhere deep, a place untouched by shame or doubt. She looked away for a moment, then back. "My kin are not far now. I know. They may ask me to return. I won't hold you. I know." Silence again, but not empty. Full. That night, She didn't sleep near the hearth. She lay her blanket by his door, not asking permission. He didn't speak a word, just left the door open wide. And somewhere where the fire waits before catching, a promise began to form. Not loud, not sealed, but real. The kind of promise made in glances, in storms, in the way someone stays even when the door is open. Outside, the rain fell soft on the roof. Inside, two people listened to it together, hearts quiet and waiting. Not for rescue, not for certainty, just for what comes next. The ridge was quiet the morning they came. The sun rose behind a veil of thin clouds, casting the land in a soft, silver light. Dew clung to the grass, and the air smelled of ash and sage. Wyatt was already in the garden. Sleeves rolled, fingers deep in soil that had warmed with spring. Elias watched from the porch, coffee cooling in his hands. He saw the way she moved, focused, still listening for things no one else could hear. It had been weeks since she first came here tied and bloodied. Now, she planted things that would outlive both of them. He didn't speak when he saw the riders. They came from the southern hills, 5 of them at first, then more behind. They rode without haste, without weapons drawn, but their presence felt like wind pushing through a narrow canyon. Inevitable, ancient. The sun glinted off painted ponies and bone-wrapped braids. Feathers swayed from lances that stayed upright, not raised. Wyatt looked up before Elias could call out. She rose slowly, wiped her hands clean on her skirt, and stepped away from the garden as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this moment. Elias stood as they approached. He didn't move toward them. He stayed planted, hands steady, back straight, not to challenge, not a guard, just to meet them with respect. The one who dismounted first was an elder, broad in the shoulders, his face carved by wind and fire. He walked with quiet authority, and when he reached Wyatt, he did not touch her. He simply looked at her long enough that Elias felt the weight of years pass between them. "You survived," the elder said. Wyatt nodded. "I did." He glanced at Elias, not with suspicion, but with caution born from history. Then back at her. "You have changed." "I've grown," she said. "Not away, just differently." The man looked toward the ranch, the neat rows of wood, the mended fences, the smoke from the chimney curling in gentle spirals. "Is this your place now?" "It is a place that let me heal." He considered her words, then stepped aside, allowing another to dismount, a woman younger, with wise eyes. She smiled softly, tears already wetting her lashes. Wyatt moved to her, held her close. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their reunion was quiet, woven from memory and breath. The elder turned again to Elias. "You are the one who found her." "I am." "You tied no rope." "I cut one." A beat passed. Then the elder inclined his head, barely, but enough. It was the kind of gesture that carried weight far beyond its movement. Wyatt stepped between them, her gaze fixed on Elias now. "They have come for me," she said. He nodded. "They'll ask me to return." He looked at her, not with fear, not even sadness, but with something deeper. He had known this would come. The land had whispered it for weeks, in the rustling of branches, in the hush before dawn. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "That's not why I stayed." "I know." She came closer. "If I leave, it's not because I lack something here. And if you stay," her voice caught like wind on a wire, "then it's because here is where I could begin." Silence rose between them. Behind, the others waited, respectful. The elder spoke something soft to the wind and turned his face eastward, as if giving her the moment. Elias stepped down from the porch. The distance between them closed. "I won't ask," he said. "I wouldn't want to be asked." "You're free." She touched the spot just over his heart, where the leather braid still rested inside his shirt. "Not all ties are chains," she said. "Some are roots." He reached into his coat and took out something wrapped in cloth, a carving, one he'd finished just the night before. A horse and a hawk carved into the same piece of cedar, their bodies turned toward each other, not touching but close enough to share breath. He offered it with both hands. She held it like something sacred, her thumb brushing over the wood grain. "I'll carry this." She turned then, walked back to the group, The elder said something in their tongue. She listened, then answered in the same quiet rhythm. The others began to prepare, mounting up, checking saddle lines. But she did not climb her horse. Not yet. Instead, she looked again at Elias, his boots planted firm in earth, his silence louder than any plea. She walked slowly to the center of the yard and knelt, took a pinch of soil and rubbed it between her palms. Then rose. "I've asked to stay near," she said. "Not far, just beyond the ridge." He blinked. "They're building a shelter. I'll visit if it's wanted." His breath left him slow, as if he'd been holding it for longer than he'd known. "It's wanted." She smiled then, the first full smile he'd seen from her since she arrived. It was not a girl's smile. It was a woman's, weathered and shining. She turned to mount her horse. As they rode away, Elias didn't go inside. He watched until the last feather dipped behind the hill. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed with something alive. Days passed. The garden grew. The sage she planted reached toward the sun. The horses wandered easy through the pasture. Elias mended a gate, sanded new carvings, left one. An owl, wings wide, near her fire circle on the edge of his land. One morning, she returned. No grand entrance. No ceremony. Just the sound of hooves on dry earth and the scent of sweetgrass on her skin. She carried a small bundle of herbs, a woven mat, and nothing else. "Do you have coffee?" she asked. "I do." She came inside, and the house did not feel full, but it felt right. Sometimes love arrives loud, like thunder breaking a dry sky. Other times, it arrives in silence, in the woman who returns without knocking, in the man who leaves the door open. Always. They never spoke of love in the way others do, but it filled the space between them like firelight, slow, sure, and lasting. And if you were to walk that ridge in early morning, you might see a hawk circle above a garden thick with sage. You might hear two voices hum different songs in harmony. And if you stood still long enough, you'd feel it too. Where the fire waits, love takes root. Not sudden, not soft, but true. If this story stirred something in you, subscribe for more soulful tales from the old Wild West, where every silence speaks and every heart has a home.